Hello, everyone. If you are here, it's because you appreciated the relevance of the first episode of my trilogy on Unicist Homeopathy. If in the first video, entitled Unicist Homeopathy, an Art and a Science, I recalled the fundamentals of the Unicist homeopathic doctrine and where I showed the fundamental differences between it and French homeopathy, in this video we will focus on the no less fundamental question of dosage. An anecdote to begin with. 20 years ago, I had the pleasure of seeing a childhood friend, Erwan, who became a doctor of homeopathy. And during our conversation in a bar not far from his office, the glass of unalterable friendship by hand, discussions obviously centered on the field of homeopathy, he told me something that, in hindsight, I find quite extraordinary. He told me that in all humility, which already proved the certain quality of his approach and commitment, he had not yet reached the level of my understanding of the homeopathic approach. This, today, by rereading my notes, shows me the gap that exists between French homeopathy and Unicist homeopathy, where we must, with courage and perseverance, find in the patient the Holy Grail, that is to say, the similimum. At a time where in France no longer reimburses homeopathic remedies, when it's difficult to find dilutions beyond 200 ch, it takes courage and be a saint to start, nowadays, studies in homeopathic medicine. But this problem doesn't only affect France. I was used to ordering my granules and my globules at the friend Claude Giron's house in Brest, who unfortunately died too much early. Subsequently, we could still find high dynamizations in Switzerland or in United States. It ended very badly for everyone. We don't find any more, but my purpose is not here to complain about the difficulties and the obstacles well orchestrated in the field of homeopathy and homeopaths, but to continue with my bag of poor deer on my shoulder and of vagabond in search of the true, the good, to transmit to you in a synthetic way, because well digested, information likely to be useful to you. So let's go back to today's theme. This is a general rule. Thanks to the perfect similarity of the remedy, which of this fact exerts a profound and complete action in all dimensions of the patient, that is to say, of the sick person, it's almost never necessary to give a new dose, except in cases where the patient has reached a level of non-return or a case that is simply incurable, especially when the patient clings to his illness as the only sign of his existence, and which, for a while, keeps it alive, but also on condition that we have done the job, that is to say, spent the essential time to a real anamnesis that must lead us to the similimum. To vigorous and resistant patients, you can give the medication in water by repeating it, but for the next few days, you carefully monitor the regular intake of the remedy, interrupting it as soon as the slightest sign of activity appears. No biting. On the other hand, to weak subjects suffering from other febrile conditions, it is something that should never be done, even with the false aim of wanting to obtain an immediate reaction. The reaction can be done in a few hours already in remitting fevers, and the single dose in these cases should be the rule, while in typhoid the reaction is much later and rarely occurs in the first hours, but only after a few days. And that is why repetition is permissible, but in your typhoid cases, if you are dealing with delicate and weak patients, never do that. The more vigorous and resistant the constitution is, the more the remedy will cooperate with this vigor to produce a rapid and risk-free action. The weaker the patient, the more careful you should be using the smallest dose possible. It is not uncommon in a large number of chronic diseases to trigger a reaction already on the first night following the administration of the drug, hence the danger of repeating the intake in an acute infection with delirium as soon as the patient regains consciousness at all or quietly doses or as soon as a slight wetness appears on the skin. Never repeat the medication once these reactions have been obtained. There is a time in diphtheria when repeating the dose can kill, and there is a time when that repetition can save life. We can stay it enough, and yet it's quite simple. In serious cases, when a reaction starts to appear, do not repeat the remedy under any circumstances. On the other hand, once this reactive manifestation has ceased and the disease, instead of improving, tends to resume its course in the other direction, then it may be necessary to repeat, but it is strictly forbidden to take a remedy again as long as the reaction is coming and lasts. One of the most essential questions for the homeopathic doctor is knowing how to detect when the reaction will occur, the moment it stops, when the disease again takes the wrong direction, and the moment when the patient appears out of danger. Being able to recognize, understand, and know how to interpret these various reactive manifestations through the language of symptoms alone, such in the task of the true homeopath organon, chapter 158. This slight homeopathic aggravation during the first few hours is not uncommon. It constitutes an excellent prognosis which, most of the time, presage that the acute disease will yield at the first dose. If this aggravation doesn't occur, if there is not the slightest exacerbation of the symptoms and the patient seems to feel gradually better after the administration of the drug, then it shows that the drug, although having acted, didn't do it sufficiently in depth, did not touch the root of the evil. In acute cases, it may be that the relief that developed no longer continues, which ipso facto leads to a stop of the reaction. This is then the appropriate time to consider the administration of a dose of the drug, and this is a perfectly correct practice. The morbid condition itself is currently intensified and rarely aggravated by the drug, if it is precisely similar. But if we break the material barrier and go beyond the raw and coarse-grained action of the drug, I mean towards the 30th energization and beyond, we get a milder effect with a deeper healing action. The lower the dose of the homeopathic medicine, when there is no lesion manifestation or functional blockage, the shorter the aggravation will be, the less. It is sometimes true that after giving a third or fourth energization of belladonna, in a case of violent childhood cerebral congestion, the aggravation can be as violent, and that if the medication is not stopped immediately, the child may die of it. This prolonged worsening without necessity is observed when dilutions are given too low, or also by the untimely repetition of the dose. And to say that there are ignorant people who still believe that homeopathy is a soft medicine. Naturally, doctrine dictates that the patient is also sensitive to the drug that will cure him, case the disease from which he suffers. Every morbid state, therefore, is aggravated by an untimely repetition and by doses that are too low and too material. The third, fourth, and sixth dilution, for example, are dangerous dilutions, but I add, well, if you are a skillful therapist. If, on the other hand, you are a less gifted therapist, your results will show little or nothing and will have no demonstrative value. Obviously, the more familiar you become with homeopathic doctrine, the more you will perfect yourself and administer the medium, then very high dynamizations, in order to deviate ever more from what could develop the slightest intoxication. This aggravation by basic dilutions differs markedly from that produced by a 5,000th dynamization, because unlike at the first, here the patient feels unquestionably better. It's about, with the very high dynamizations, of a short, rapid, decisive reaction, where only the characteristic symptoms of the disease are aggravated. There is no question here morbid addition. The disease itself is not intensified. Only these characteristic symptoms undergo as a kind of exacerbation and become particularly prominent. And the patient says to you, despite that I feel that I'm better, currently we have been up to the 13th millionth energization of Lachesis, prepared by Kent for his wife. We have not yet reached the end, since with this dynamization almost incredible, we were able to observe a worsening of the symptoms again. We have never claimed that any dynamization can suit everyone. Remember that dynamization must constantly adapt to the stadium progression of the disease and go to the psychosomatic state of the patient in taking into account his sensitivity and constitution. Any other doctor is always afraid of not giving enough. He is looking for the maximum bearable and is constantly moving to the threshold of toxicity. The homeopath, on the other hand, is always afraid to give too much, his goal being to apply the minimum necessary because he constantly cultivates this adage primum non cere, and above all, do no harm. A quantitative increase in the dose cannot make it more homeopathic. The first thing is the most important to consider is the similarity of the drug. In the second place, only comes the question of its energization. It's important that we know well exactly from all our experiences that the third centesimal energization is low enough to undertake any case, either acute or chronic, but as to when does the upper limit, the maximum limit of homeopathic attenuations stop. No mortal has yet been able to say so. It is desirable to follow ascending series in order to be able to act in depth, is to arrive to be developed through our dynamization processes, all the more internal and profound that exist to varying degrees, also gradual in our medications. An optimum figure for each dynamization has been set. Each of these attenuations, although distinct and distant from each other, invariably linked together. Organon, chapter 283. Not only to avoid aggravation, but for yet another reason. The true master of the art of healing, in order to proceed in a completely cautious and fruitful way, will only administer the homeopathic remedy, the best chosen in all respects, in very small quantity, that is to say, few globules or very small volume of liquid. Observations of the drug action and prognosis, if soon the prescription is made, the drug absorbed, the practitioner then begins his observations on his patient. His whole future will result from these observations and the conclusions that the doctor will draw from them. On his way of acting will depend the good that his patient will benefit, because his deductions will essentially be the consequence of his observations. If he is neither able nor competent to appreciate the meaning and scope of those he sees, he will make mistakes, make clumsy prescriptions, often change this medication, and all this to the great detriment of the one who asks for help. In this area, there is really only one way forward, and nothing can replace sound understanding and intelligence. Changes are now beginning to take place. What are they? What do they mean? What do they represent? The doctor, when listening to the presentation of his patient, must know how to interpret what is happening. For most of them, it will be good to repeat each symptom by asking the patient what happened and what changes they may have undergone. It is known that the remedy works when it causes a change in symptoms, by which I mean the following different possibilities. 1. Their improvement. 2. Their aggravation. 3. Their disappearance. 4. The order in which they present or disappear. 5. Finally, the direction they take. All these reactions are the changes produced by medication, and these modifications need to be well studied. The true homeopathic aggravation is a transient intensification of the disease, that is to say, of the symptoms of the patient, while the latter is going towards the better, and this is what a doctor can observe following a truly homeopathic prescription. I specify that the true homeopathic aggravation is one in which the symptoms are exacerbated while the patient tells you, I feel better. It will then be appropriate to enter into the detail of these various states concerning the hours, the locations, the duration, and the way in which they develop. The opinion of the patient must be sanctioned by the symptoms. In most cases, they are corroborated by what the patient tells. But remember that the symptoms themselves are the most satisfactory evidence for the doctor. It is also a question of knowing through the study of the symptomatology whether the changes that occur are sufficiently profound. The direction that the symptoms are going to take will be enough to inform us on this subject, mainly in attacks, chronic infections. Now, 12 different eventualities may present themselves to the practitioners. To the practitioner. 1. Prolonged aggravation with final decline of the patient. What did we do? A thought was made. The homeopsoric was too deep. It provoked destructive phenomena. In this case, the vital reaction was impossible. The patient was incurable. But immediately the question arises, what will then be appropriate to do? Should we give up giving homeopathic remedies? In cases where a patient gradually withers away, if you are not aware of such reactions and doubt the possibility, despite the very low doses administered, of being able to further aggravate the patient's condition, all you have to do is sign at a more or less short notice his death certificate. It is therefore necessary in equivocal and suspicious cases never give dynamizations that exceed the 30th centesimal, or at most the 200th, and above all observe if the aggravation tends to be too strong or too prolonged. There are many pulmonary signs to observe in this type of case that arouses doubt in the doctor whether to administer or not the basic remedy when an organic state is detectable, and especially if it's already advanced. 2. Long worsening finally followed by an improvement. Despite a prolonged and rather painful worsening, you nevertheless get a final reaction that can be clearly interpreted in the direction of an improvement. The aggravation may last for weeks, but in the end, this weak constitution seems to react nonetheless, and you are finally witnesses a slow but sure improvement, both of the patient and of the disease. This shows that the morbid condition has not progressed as far, and that the changes produced have remained in the field yet functional, or already functional lesional. You waited patiently for all the reactions, exhaustion, and at the end of the 3rd month, the patient is ready to receive a new dose of the drug. You then notice the repetition of the same reactions, which tell you that this man was at a limit which If he had waited longer, would any recovery impossible? It is therefore always good practice in suspected cases to use the low attenuations, 30 or 200, to act with caution, always being ready to antidote the remedy if the reactions take the wrong direction. 3. Rapid, brief, well-marked aggravation, followed by a prompt and lasting improvement of the patient. This improvement will be net, the reaction of the vigorous organism, because in these cases there is not yet a tendency to tissue damage in vital organs. Any structural change that could possibly be present would be, moreover, only quite superficial and located in organs that are neither essential nor vital. It should not surprise you, however, to witness the formation of abscesses, to observe often ganglion reactions, sometimes evolving towards suppuration, but always in areas likely to threaten the life of the patient. So, a rapid, short, and strong worsening is really what you want, because it is always followed by a quick improvement. 4. Return to the patient's health without any worsening. You then witness healings rarely satisfactory and in which the administration of the remedy is not followed by any kind of aggravation. If so, we know that the prescribed energization was the one that corresponded exactly to the given case. But do not forget that you are facing here a situation that you should not expect to encounter every day. Improvement precedes the aggravation, or A. The remedy covered purely superficial symptoms and could only act as a palliative. You discover that your prescription was therefore wrong. The remedy did not cover all the essential symptoms and, as a result, could not affect the entire constitutional state. Or B. The patient had already reached the incurable stage of injury, and the remedy, albeit with the appropriate rigor, was administered too late for such an advanced condition. Therefore, the choice of this drug was unfavorable. 6. Too short a duration of relief of symptoms. If nothing really intervened that could hinder the free action of the drug in the economy, the interference can be involuntary, unconscious, or intentional. Then you are entitled to be wary of this case. A rapid reaction of the organism means everything that can be desired from the action of the remedy, namely that it is well selected, that the vital economy responds well and does not present significant lesional alteration, and if things are going as they should, recovery is near. In the acute state, in the improvement is too short, it is because the inflammatory state is at such a degree that the organs are threatened by the rapid process that develops in it. In chronic cases, too short an improvement means that there are structural changes, that the organs are destroyed or in the process of being destroyed, and in all cases are in a very precarious condition. These various changes cannot always be diagnosed quod vitam, but they are nevertheless present and a penetrating observer who has worked seriously for years will often be able to interpret the symptoms for both diagnostic and prognostic purposes without even having to resort to a physical examination of the patient. So much so that based solely on rigorous and thorough observation of the symptoms, he can almost prophesy what will happen. 7. A period of improvement of the disease for 24 hours, without the real relief that one would expect for the patient. In some subjects, the improvement cannot go beyond a certain point. There are latent conditions. See Organon, chapter 172. So latent conditions, either functional or organic, that prevent them from progressing beyond a certain stage. Such patients cannot go beyond certain possibilities depending on their pathological condition. They are curable only up to a certain limit that they cannot exceed. The remedies act favorably, but the patient is not cured and can never be cured. In this case, the patient has been compensated, and this is the appropriate palliation that can be obtained with homeopathic remedies. Refer to this patient to specialists assisted by the most modern technologies. 8. Some patients experience all the remedies they take. This more particularly in subjects with hysterical tendencies, in hypersensitive allergic, hypochondriacs, anaphylactics, and in all the overworked. Unfortunately, such cases are very often incurable. You will give them a dose of a high dynamization, and they will not take long to present a whole series of symptoms specific to the remedies absorbed. That is to say, to experiment with them. While they are under the influence of this medication, they seem to be immune. Nothing else affects them. This is a taking possession of the remedy, just as a disease would, the reaction of the remedy presenting a period of progress and a period of decline. This is how it works. Such patients are involuntary experimenters by hypersensitivity. They will see the appearance of symptoms specific to all the drug they absorb, and these to all the energizations, even the highest ones. Such topics will cause you many concerns. When you find a patient of this kind, hypersensitivity to high dynamizations, return to the 200th, to the 200th, or even the 30th dynamization centesimal. However, you will often be able to cure their acute conditions with these energizations and to act favorably on their chronic disease with 30, 200, and even 500 energization. In many of them, this exaggerated sensitivity is congenital. They will have to endure it all their lives until their last breath. It seems that nothing can deliver them from this hyper irritability, from these states of hyper excitability. If this hyper energy has quite a few disadvantages, it can nevertheless become a very useful source of information for the homeopathic doctor in the reactions that will be given to him to observe during these treatments. In addition, in such patients, you will also be able to see, as soon as they have come out of a drug experiment, that they are ready to repeat it or to do another one. 9. Actions of drugs on experimenters. Any properly directed experimentation always benefits those who submit to it, provided they are in good health. Organon, chapter 141a. This is relative, however, because any individual claiming to be in perfect health may be subject to constitutional manifestations or symptoms. 10. New symptoms appearing after the administration of a new remedy. The presence of a large number of new symptoms after taking a homeopathic remedy will generally make it possible to predict that the prescription will be revealed unfavorable. Sometimes the appearance of a recent symptom will make it look like a new symptom, when it is simply the manifestation of an old symptom that the patient had forgotten or did not observe. The greater the series of new symptoms occurring after the administration of a remedy, the more there is reason to doubt the value of the prescription established. It is likely that after the disappearance of these new symptoms, the patient will find himself in a stage quo ante and without any improvement being noticed. Such cases demonstrate that the choice of remedy was not perfectly homeopathic and therefore not in accordance with the principles of similarity. 11. Return of old symptoms. Disease is cured according to Herring's law. That is to say, that the symptoms disappear from top to bottom, from inside to outside, and in the reverse order of their appearance. Many times you will see the old symptoms return and then stop without any change being made to the medication. Well, that is excellent and means that the medicinal agent should be given full freedom of action without any interference whatsoever. It is only when the old symptoms that have reappeared persist that a repeat of the remedy becomes most often necessary. 12. Wrong direction of symptoms. There is great danger in choosing a remedy based on symptoms alone exteriors. For example, to give a drug corresponding exclusively to the skin, ignoring all the symptoms relating to the patient himself, and neglecting those representing his general condition. It is indeed perfectly true that this remedy, solely in relation to the skin, will be able to bring in, as they say, this skin condition by morbid substitution or metastasis, and the dermatosis will disappear while the patient himself suffers from many other symptoms and is in no way cured. I tell you, in truth, such patients will remain ill until the camouflaged rash reoccurs as it was before, and that is their chance to recovery, unless it seeks a different localization, and then the disease will only be displaced and therefore not cured. Thank you for your attention. See you soon for the third part of my triptych entitled Unicist Homeopathy, Second Prescription, in preparation for you. I thank you very much.